Good morning, YouTube. This is Mike from the last Corvette. Today is Thursday, December 15th. Crazy, 10 days away from Christmas. Hamster wheel, I always say it. Slow down and try to make time for you, for your family, because it's just, the older you get, my grandpa and my father's still with us, so he always reminds me that I need to slow down a little bit. But anyway, I'm making this video because I made a bunch of modifications last winter to my C6 fuel system. Not only to replace, basically, we'll say broken parts, but also to upgrade it to my spec so it can run naturally in a naturally aspirated form without having any fuel issues, on top of converting it over to E85. Now, I was looking through my YouTube. I stayed up kind of late at work, so I was looking through my YouTube, and I saw that somebody left a comment about their C6 and now this new fuel issue that they're experiencing. So let me explain. And this is for you. If you're watching this, I will definitely try to help you and guide you in the right direction through YouTube videos or even through email, whichever way you prefer. I don't know where you are in the US or in the world, but let's do it. So the comment was very simple. The vehicle was running, I'm assuming it was idling somewhere, and it ran out of fuel. When a vehicle runs out of fuel, obviously the engine will shut off, and then the accessory side, including the power feeding to the fuel pump, will stay on. Now, it's fine to run out of fuel because I actually purposely ran my C6 out of fuel prior to starting my fuel pump and my fuel system upgrade. You can do it two ways. You can either run it, or you can disconnect your fuel line, your braided fuel line, right at the fuel rail. You can either use the accessory button, or you can actually jump the relay and force all the fuel out if you're working on the fuel tank. And of course, remember, later C5s and all of the C6s, they have two tanks, one driver's side right behind the driver's seat, also one on the passenger side in the same location as well. The driver's side tank contains the fuel pump and the sending unit, and the passenger side is basically the sending unit, or AKA fuel float switch. So first thing is first, do you know for sure that your fuel gauge works proper? Okay, so basically half a tank is right around like 8 gallons, which will fill up your driver's side tank, and then everything else gets transferred over via a crossover pipe to your passenger side tank. So that's key. Now, the second thing is this. How long did the vehicle sit in this state after running out of fuel? And once again, I'm assuming it was sitting somewhere in the parking lot, in the driveway, while it was idling, or were you driving? Now, that's important because you have to realize when the vehicle dies, you're still sending power to the relay, and you're still sending power to the fuel pump. So the fuel pump will try to prime, basically dry cycle, which is newer fuel pumps. Even in the C6s, they're pretty good about dry cycles, but they do get hot. And if they get hot, they will, well, go bad. They'll burn up. Okay, so, you know, if the vehicle sat there, let's say for 10, 15, 20 minutes, out of fuel, still in accessory mode, that is not good. But I'm going to tell you some troubleshoot steps that you need to do, and then we can go from there. So first thing is first, you need to make sure they have enough fuel, at least in your driver's side tank. I would start with at least 2 to 4 gallons of fresh 93 octane, or whatever octane you normally run in your area. I would dump the fuel in, and then I would get in the vehicle, and without starting the vehicle, I would use the push start, but without putting your foot on the brake. I would push, it's in the bottom right hand corner, the ACC, or the accessory side of your circuit, and I would push that in. You usually got to hold it in for 5-6 seconds, and your dash will come alive, and at the same time you should hear your fuel pump prime. You can leave the door open. That's probably the easiest thing you can do. You'll hear a whine or a buzz, like buzz, like that. Basically what it's trying to do is trying to build pressure into your fuel rail. If you don't hear the fuel pump, obviously you already checked the fuse. Now, the best way to check the fuse is with a voltmeter, to make sure the fuse indeed is good, or you can just swap it with a good known fuse. Same thing with the relay. Relays do go bad, they stick, but normally from a short. But I would still at least try to swap the same relay part number into the fuel pump slot, just to cover those two areas. Now, if you're not getting anything, so meaning that your relay is good, your fuse is good, and you're not hearing anything from the fuel pump, then the next step, unfortunately, is to jack up the vehicle. You have to remove the driver's side passenger tire, and then you would have to remove the inner wheel liner, which I explain in a bunch of different videos. There's also tons of videos that show you guys how to remove the inner wheel liner. It's not that hard. Once the inner wheel liner is disengaged and dropped, you will expose the body harness leading into the fuel pump module harness, which is a pigtail that runs from the fuel pump module, basically the top of the tank, into the body harness. Then I would disconnect it. I would inspect it once again. This came up before, for any fried wires, melted wires, or corrosion, or even melted pins when you disconnect it. But first, basically inspect the wire loom visually before you even disconnect it, just to make sure there's nothing obvious. Then once you disconnect it, you do need to check for power. Yes, there are several wires there. I can help you with a schematic. You will need a voltmeter again, and you're going to be checking on the body side, not at the fuel pump side. So you'll put a voltmeter in, or even a test light, and then ground out the test light or the voltmeter, and then stick the probe of either or into the main power wire that feeds the fuel pump. And you can do the same thing again, accessory button on, and then you should see power. Now, if you see power, unfortunately, it's about a 90% chance that your fuel pump is fried, and then you get into the whole business of, hey, are you going to do it yourself? Are you going to take it to an aftermarket shop or the dealership to replace the fuel pump? That is the key. Now, if you're not getting power, then you're in luck, because now you need to trace back and figure out where is the broken link. Of course, the fuse, the relay, and the whole harness that feeds the fuel pump. So that's number one. Let's say that you are getting power to the fuel pump, or if you're also getting power to the fuel pump and you hear the fuel pump prime. Normally it will purge all of the air pockets or air bubbles in the fuel system, because it is normally, depending on the fuel pump setup, it will be anywhere from 45 to 62 psi. It's enough to push the fuel up the fuel lines and then into your fuel rail and into your injectors, and the vehicle should fire. So if that's the case, then you need to start looking at the fuel delivery itself to make sure nothing is pinched, clogged, or anything like that. Now, you don't have a fuel filter, external fuel filter on the C6. You do have one inside the fuel pump, inside the fuel tank itself. So it's not accessible, it is serviceable. If you check all that, then the last step, if you are hearing the pump run, I would definitely check fuel pressure during prime or during crank. By doing that, you will need a fuel pressure gauge that you can lease or rent at O'Reilly's or any other auto parts store. O'Reilly's usually works this way: you prepay for the whole unit, then when you bring it back, you get your money back right away. There is a Schrader valve right on the driver's side fuel rail, and then basically all you do is you just connect the gauge, you zero out the gauge, and then you start cranking to see how much PSI you're building on the fuel side. Now, if you go through all those things, obviously there's different variations of how this could be solved, fixed, and obviously troubleshooting kind of splits into three ways. but hopefully it gives you a little bit of insight on where to start and how this fuel system works. But if you do have, if you get lucky and if you do have a air bubble or air pocket, while you're priming, meaning that while you're either cranking the engine or doing the accessory, you can actually purge either with the fuel gauge, the fuel pressure gauge, or you can also manually stick a small screwdriver into the Schrader valve and start releasing any air that's trapped in there, and eventually you will get fuel pressure. But to me, it sounds like it could be a bad fuel pump, especially depending on how long the vehicle ran dry. Like I said, those fuel pump modules will burn out because, for a simple fact, on a C6 Corvette, guys, the only way to check fuel pressure is through a Schrader valve, through a manual pressure gauge, okay, fuel pressure gauge. On the newer vehicles, you can actually go into your computer scan tool and see it, like on your high pressure fuel systems. On LS, especially a C6 Corvette, it's still very old school. The only way you can see, and the vehicle has to be running if your fuel pump is starving, is of course by your fuel injector duty cycles. But as far as the pressure goes, there's really nothing there to tell the fuel pump, hey, shut off, you lost pressure. So hopefully it helps. Reply back and I will try to do my best to get you in the right direction and get this resolved. Thank you.